Hi everyone, and welcome to Gardening and Canning in the City. So today we're going to ground up some meat. I got a couple of nice roasts from Costco, and so I wanted to do a hot pack. A hot pack is different than a cold pack as you pre-cook it. And then when you pre-cook it, it makes it into the chunks and it'll stay in the chunks. And usually pack it in a broth. I'm going to use a beef broth. And whereas a cold pack, you pack it raw and you pack it right into the jars and then you don't add anything, and then what you have is meat for shredding. So what I want to do is a hot pack so that I have it for chunks so that I can do stews. So come on with me and let's get started. So we're going to take our roast and we're going to cut it into chunks, and then we're going to brown these chunks in a pan, and then we'll throw them in the oven to keep them hot while we're waiting to get everything else ready to go. So I'm going to heat up some beef broth, and that's what we're going to put over our meat. So I'm just going to throw these in here and start cooking these up. And you just kind of cut whatever size chunks you want. It doesn't really matter. Just wanted to be able to have it cut up so you can pre-cook it. I like to cut most of the fat off. So. Basically just dice it all up. And I got 2 roasts, and so I'm going to dice this up and get it browning in the pan. And then I'll bring you back. I have my pressure canner heated and ready to go. You have to use a pressure canner, not a pressure cooker. When you have the lid, you always want to take the lid and make sure that this hole right here is clear. Now, kind of make sure that there's nothing trapped in it. I got my broth heating up and getting ready to go in there. This is an organic beef broth I've made. And my meat is all browned. It doesn't need to be completely cooked through. You just want to make sure it's brown. So what we're going to do is now start loading up the hot jars and get the broth in there, debubble it, put the jars and lids on, and then we'll put in the pressure canner. My lids are right here. They're all hot and ready to go. Being able to can your own meats is really convenient, because then you can have, at least a year's worth of meat on the shelf. You don't have to worry about it getting freezer burnt. It will stay on the shelf for pretty much up to like 2-3 years. Probably want to use it within the first year though. I would normally do it. So we're going to pack these into the jars. It's too much. There we go. You're going to use a 1-inch headspace. You always use a 1-inch headspace whenever you're canning meats. But being able to hot pack is really nice, because you can use these for stews and it'll stay nice and chunky. It'll basically taste like it's been cooking like in a crock pot all day long. So it'll be nice and tender and juicy. And when you're canning your own meat, you got control. I mean, you can use conventional, you can use organic, grass-fed, grass-finished, you can use your own broth, you can even use water if you want to use water. You can use a vegetable broth. Any of that will work with this. I just wouldn't put in a lot of seasonings. Some seasonings will go rancid under pressure canning, so I usually don't use a lot of seasonings when I'm pressure canning. I like to keep it basic, and then I season it whenever I'm using it, depending on how I'm using it. So my pressure canner will hold 7 quarts, so we'll be doing 7 quarts at a time today. I've been browning up my next roast When you pick out what roast you want to use for canning, you want to make sure you use a nice lean roast. You don't want a lot of fat because that'll decrease the shelf life because fat will eventually go rancid. So the leaner the roast, the longer it will last on the shelf. So I'm going to go ahead and start loading the meat in the jars. Now when I load my jars, you can see right here, I don't fill them up all the way. Because what happens is the ones on the top will not be under the broth because, you know, you're using a 1-inch headspace. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with them. It's just they have, they get funny looking. They get kind of a greenish brown tint to them, and I don't like that. So I like to make sure that all my meat is under the broth when I do a hot pack. So fill the rest of these up. 2 more to go. And when these cook in that canner, they're gonna come out, they're gonna be nice and really tender. They're great on like mashed potatoes. You can make a super stew with them. You can make roast beef French dip sandwiches with it. It's just incredible. It's basically like you've cooked it in one of those Ninja pressure cookers is what it tastes like. Or it's been cooking in a crock pot all day long. It's nice and tender. Doesn't matter if you use a really tough cut of meat because it's gonna be like, you'll be able to just shred this apart and cut it with a fork. It's gonna be that tender when it's done. There we go. There we go. I was gonna wait on doing meat, but with all this COVID stuff going on again for possibly a round 2, a lot of my friends were asking me to please can meat because they want to know how to do it. So let me get this out of the way. I'm going to add the broth. Okay. So as you can see, the jars are nice and hot. You want to make sure the jars are still, they're going to be hot with the meat in it, but you don't want to start with ice cold jars because you'll shatter your jars. Okay, let's put the sauce or the broth in. You want to make sure that this is nice and hot and ready to go. I'm just going to put it in there. You can also use a vegetable broth, or you can use just plain water if you want to use just plain water. I really like using a beef broth. Bone broth is what I use. And you're going to leave a 1-inch headspace. Okay. And like I've showed you in my other video, I like to debubble with a chopstick. I just find that they're easier to get in there and get all the bubbles out. And that big wand, that big plastic wand to me is uncomfortable. Okay. So, your very bottom neck, that is your 1-inch headspace. So I'm going to put just a teensy bit more in there. After you debubble, always make sure that you got the 1-inch headspace. And then you're going to wipe the rims. Make sure there's no meat on them or anything, because that could cause it not to seal. Nice and clean. You want to use brand new lids. I also like to use brand new jars when I'm canning meats, because if someone comes in there with a knife and scrapes the inside of the jar, it'll leave like a little hairline crack, and then when it goes under pressure, it will cause the jar to break. So I like to use new jars. So just fingertip tight and in the pressure canner. The pressure canner has, I believe it's 1 or 2 quarts of water. You got to look at the instructions for your canner and see how much water is supposed to be in the bottom. But I think it's about 1.5 inches up. I have a little line on my canner that I mark on it so I know where it belongs. So I make sure and put enough water, because if you run out of water during the process, you will warp your canner and ruin it. So always check your instructions and make sure that you have the correct amount of water in your canner. You want to get all these bubbles out that are in between all the different pieces, because that will cause it not to seal if you can't get all the air out. Check my headspace. I need a little bit more in there. When you debubble, you're always going to have usually just a little bit of room that you could put a little more in there. You want to make sure that headspace is correct, or else you're going to end up with meat that's under the water or over the water. There you go. And the ring, and into the hot canner. Next. All right, I'm going to put the rest of the juice in these, and then I'll show you how to start that canner up and get to pressure canning. All right, we got 7 quarts all ready to go in the canner. Now, if this was pints, I could put another plate on top of this and run a second layer, but with quarts, I can only do 1 layer. So I'm going to turn this from low up to high and start getting the heat going. Take my lid. You see the lid has little locks there. You want to make sure you get it all the way around, and then you slide it. Oh, I can't do this and hold at the same time. But basically you just take these handles and you bring them together. So now I have the lid locked on. You can see the handles line up together. This is your Presto. Now what I'm going to do is this vent right here, I'm going to let the steam start coming up on that, and once I see steam start coming out of there on a steady pace, I'm going to let it vent for 10 minutes. That helps to get all the air out of the canner, and then we'll put a metal weight on top and it'll start to come up to pressure. So I'm going to wait for it to show steam, and then I'll show you what that looks like. So now I got a nice steady stream of steam coming out. I'm going to set my timer for 10 minutes so that I can vent the canner for 10 minutes. And as you can see, the pressure is already building up a little bit because this has popped up. But there's the weight is not on there yet. So now we're just going to vent it for 10 minutes and then we'll put the weight on it. Alright, our pressure canner's 10 minutes up for venting. So now we're just going to take this weight and I'm going to stick it right on top. Now this little pressure gauge here, you want to bring it up to the pressure for your elevation. For my elevation, I'm at 2,200 feet, so I'm going to bring it up to 12 pounds. And once it's at 12 pounds, I'm going to keep it there. I'm not going to let it go up to 15 pounds, down to 9 pounds, up to 11 pounds. You're not going to let it go up and down. You're going to want to stay right here at the stove, and you're going to watch it very, very close. Well, I ran into a little complication. When I was bringing it up to pressure, it was leaking. And it was a brand new gasket. And for some reason, it was a brand new bad gasket. So always make sure that you have several gaskets on hand. So if you're in the middle of a canning session and this happens to you, you can change out your gasket. And I just changed it out my last canning session because I noticed it was leaking. So I had to take it apart, and now I'm venting it again for 10 minutes. It's got 2 minutes left on it, and then I will bring it back up to pressure. In the meantime, when I am canning, I always run 2 canners at a time. So now I'm doing pints. I had 2 pints of meat left, so I put them in there with the broth, and I'm doing pinto beans. And what I do is I dry can my pinto beans. For pints, it is a ½ cup of dry beans. You fill it up with boiling water up to the 1-inch mark. Put your lid on. Put the ring on. Fingers sit tight. And then you're going to load it in the canner. Now, I can double load this with 2 layers. So it usually comes with one of these trays. Buy an extra tray, because what you're going to want to do when you're doing pints is double layer them. So you can have 8 pints on the bottom, 8 pints on top, which is 16 pints at the same time. Very big time saver. Always make sure that you have this extra tray. So I'm going to get this loaded up with ½ cup of dry beans. Fill it up with the boiling water, wipe the rims, put the lid on, and in the canner it's going to go. Now I got my second Presto canner loaded up with 16 pints of jars. Now what I'm going to do is put the lid on, lock it. I'm going to bring it up to heat. It will vent for 10 minutes just like the other one did. And then we'll put the weight on and bring it up to pressure. Our other one that has the quarts is up to about 8 pounds of pressure. It's got a few pounds to go, and then we'll turn it down once it hits 12 pounds of pressure. My first canner has come up to pressure. I'm now going to set the timer for 90 minutes because I have meat in quarts, so the time for the quarts is 90 minutes. My other canner has not even started to vent yet. I'm still waiting for it to finish venting. Once it's done doing its venting for 10 minutes, I'll put the thing on there and it will go for 75 minutes because I have pints in this one. So pints is 75, quarts is 90. So we're going to let these go. And when you have these on the stove, you do not want to walk away from them. While these are on the stove, I'm usually cleaning the kitchen, I'm emptying the dishwasher, I'm cleaning the dishes, whatever I have to do, I am right here watching these canners. Don't ever walk away from a canner. They do have a little safety in the back. That little rubber thing will pop out if you walk away and you forget about it and the pressure gets too high, that will pop out. So there is a safety, but the problem is you will ruin your canner. And you do not want to ruin your canner. So I'm going to be close by and let this go for 90 minutes. So our time is up on the first canner. So I'm going to turn it off and we're going to let the gauge go all the way down to 0. And when this little button right here, when it goes down, that means there's no more pressure inside the canner. And you can take off the weight and you can open it up. But until then, we're just going to let it slowly come back down to pressure. So both of our canners have come down to pressure. They're still really hot, but you can see this tab right here is now down. So that means the pressure is gone. So I can take this off. Now it's got 0 on the gauge. Just because the gauge says 0, you always want to make sure this is down. That means the pressure is gone, and then you take that off. And any other pressure would come right out. Don't take the weight off until everything is down to 0 and this is down. So now what we're going to do is unlock it. See if I can pull this off. And I'm going to just let it vent for about 5 minutes. I'm going to do it with both of them. Let the steam come out for 5 minutes. This helps the jars come down slowly so they don't crack or the fluid doesn't come out of them. So they're both going to sit here for about 5 minutes just like this, and then I'll come back and take the jars out. Alright, so our 5 minutes is up. gonna start pulling these jars out of the canner. And they are really, really hot. And this is the beef. Look good? See? That is really easy. Anybody can do this and have meat on the shelf for your family. Oops. You can see they're already gone down before I even opened up the canner. And what we're going to do is we're going to let these sit for 24 hours undisturbed. And all the tops are popping down. There we go. So that's our quarts. Now we're going to pull out the pints. On top we have our beans. You can see they're all cooked in the sauce, all ready to go. And the quarts went for 90 minutes. The pints go for 75 minutes. I started, I guess it was about 2 o'clock. It's now 7:30. So that gives you kind of an approximate time of how long it takes to do this. When it comes out of the canner, the tops might still be up. Don't, push them down forcefully or anything. They'll go out down all by themselves. The jars might be a little dirty, a little greasy. It's no big deal, very normal. When everything's all done, you're going to scrub them all down and take the rings off and put them on the shelf. So they'll be nice and clean when they're on the shelf. Okay. They're still really, really hot, but as they cool, the lid will pop down and seal. That one's already sealed right there. And here is the pint of the roast beef. And all the rest are beans. There we go. We got roast beef and we have beans on the shelf. So we're going to let it cool. And I'll bring you back when they're all cooled tomorrow in 24 hours. All of our jars sealed, and they have been sitting here for 24 hours. Now what you do is you take the ring off, and as you can see on the jar, it's all greasy and dirty. That's really normal. But I'm really happy I got my 1-inch headspace, so no fluid got sucked out during processing. That's usually, if you see that, you're going to see a lot of it if you're having your temperatures going up and down as far as your weight. If your weight's going up and down and up and down, that's going to cause siphoning out of your jars. But as you can see, all my jars didn't really have any siphoning, so they're in good shape. But if it does happen, as long as this is sealed, your food's still good. There's not a problem with that. So what you're going to want to do now is I take a scrubby brush and I scrub them off really good. It's paying close attention to up here by the lid to make sure that all the gook that is around there is all cleaned off. And then once that is all done, we can take them and store them on the shelf. We clean them for 2 reasons. One, they're dirty. 2, you don't want to attract bugs with the smell. So you want to make sure they're good and clean. So we can get that done and we'll be right back. Okay, so I scrubbed my jars with a soapy sponge and scrubbed all the grease and gook underneath the rims all off. I dated it and marked them, and now it's time to put them on the shelf, and we're gonna finish up the beans. And this is how our beans turned out. They all look amazing. I'm taking off the rims. I'm gonna scrub these down too, mark them, date them, and then we'll put them on the shelf. And then of course we have the 2 jars of beef that are in here. So let's get that done. All right, the jars are all done, and they are on the shelf with the rest of the beef. On the very top shelf up here, I have chicken. This is all chicken, and this is more chicken. I like to keep them inside the box as much as possible, but you know, that's. Here you can see this one is a hot pack where I pre-cooked the chicken, and this one is a cold pack where it was put in raw. So you can see the difference. This one's in chunks, and this one is going to be more of a shredded, sort of like what you get in the stores. But you can see also when you do cold pack, some of the meat is going to be out above the fluid because it makes its own. It makes its own broth. So there's going to be a little discoloration, which is not really a big deal. But, you know, if you don't like that, then do hot pack. No big deal. This is the meat. I got ground beef down here. This is all the meat like we just did. Got stew meat. And then I got quarts of stew meat and quarts of ground beef. And here's some more quarts. This is what the ground looks like. I did have some siphoning. That's because So if you see this when you're canning and you're not dealing with pressure going up and down, chances are it's probably your gasket. So you want to make sure you always have a couple backup gaskets, because, you know, just like when I was canning yesterday, my backup gasket was bad. So I had to take that out and put another gasket in. So always make sure you have several gaskets. Down here I have my pork. I have ground pork. This is sausage. These are done hot pack. And quarts of sausage. And these are cold pack. So you can use these for, you know, like pulled pork. They're really good. And then of course on my totes I've got all my flour. This is where I keep all my flour and stuff at. I vacuum seal them and put in oxygen absorbers, and you know, you can't store flour long term, you know, like 20 years, but it'll keep them fresh a little bit longer. So if you want to get like a big bag of flour and then vacuum seal it, you can put it in those totes. You just got to put it in a paper bag before you vacuum seal it, so the flour doesn't get sucked up into your sealer. So there we go. My meat shelf is looking good. It's all restocked. And then when the kids run out of meat and they need more, they just come and they know where the shelf is and they restock. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's canning session, and hopefully you learned how to do meat. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comments section. And if you like what you saw, please subscribe to my channel, because we got a lot more canning to do. I skipped right to meats because a lot of people were requesting how to do meats. A lot of my friends and family want to learn how to do that with the way things are today. So I did do a video about canning meats. But at least now, hopefully, you will learn how to can meats, and you can store hundreds of pounds or up to a year to 2 years worth of meat on the shelf. A lot of my friends are buying, you know, half cow, whole cow. They don't have room to put that much meat in the freezer, but they can it. You know, if your power goes out and you lose your freezers, make sure you have jars on hand. Make sure you have lids on hand. Make sure you have propane on hand, so that you can can up your own meat and not have to have a massive barbecue. You never know what's going to happen nowadays. And if anything, you know, you got food on the shelf. If someone gets sick or loses their job, you know, you have everything that you need to eat. You can feed your family. And I hope this was very informative for you. You guys have a great day, and thank you for watching. Bye.